What do you all think? What is the most important question that it would be great if you could have it answered? Yeah.
If we truly have free will or not. I do want to know, like, at the end of my life, like, were all my decisions mine, or were they made for me?
Free will. Why would you want to know about that, though? Why is that important?
I want to know because, obviously, if I'm the one making the choices, then there's more weight to it. If someone else is controlling me and making those decisions since they don't have free will, then I can kind of excuse some stuff. But I kind of want to know, like, how much weight did my life really have?
Weight. So it kind of seems like you're talking about it in terms of meaning. Like your life would be more meaningful if you do have free will. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, what do the rest of y'all think? Am I in the Matrix? Is the world real? Something like that?
I don't really care.
Well, what do you care about? What question do you want answered? What's important?
See, I was trying to figure that out. And, Walker gave a pretty good one. And I'm just living life.
Okay. Walker, do you want to chip in?
Mine was kind of like his with the free will, but it was just, does anything really matter?
Does anything really matter? Yeah, that seems like a good question, right? Okay, anybody else? Different question? Yeah.
Is there life outside this planet?
Is there life outside this planet? So you're thinking like alien life, extraterrestrials?
Yeah, but also it's kind of not a catch-all, but it can explain a lot of other things as well.
Yeah. Maybe you think answering that kind of question would have a bunch of implications for other questions that you have. Anybody else? Yeah.
A little selfish, but what tools and what direction do I need to apply to succeed?
Something like that is what I was looking for. Yeah. We all care about living, right? We all care about living well. How should you live your life? How are you supposed to live? This is a critical question, right? Because if you don't know how you're supposed to live or how you should live, what, are you just going to fumble your way through things and hope things work out? This is the question that we're going to be exploring in the next few weeks. And this is the primary question that the interlocutors in our next case study are going to try to answer. For the next few weeks, we're looking at Plato's Republic. This was a work that was written a long, long time ago, but it is one that can still inform our lives today. It's a work that tries to wrestle with these big questions of human life. What is good? What should I pursue? How am I supposed to live? What is justice? How should we organize ourselves socially and politically? All of these questions the Republic touches on. Now, the guy who wrote it, Plato. Okay, we might call him along with Socrates, the father of Western philosophy. Basically, the guy who got the whole ball rolling for, all of the texts that we've been looking at in this class so far, and the investigations of these very fundamental questions about free will, meaning, what is good and what is bad, what is justice, all of these different things. First, it was written on scrolls. Of course, we have it in book form now because it's been translated so many different times. But it's important that you know about this Plato guy, okay? Because the way that you think and live today is deeply informed by the stuff that he wrote about and the stuff that he talked about and the stuff that he taught. He is arguably the first founder of a university or college in Western society, in Western history. Okay? He founded this school known as the Academy, where there were classes and lectures held and people wrestled with these kinds of questions. And it is his philosophical work that has come to deeply influence, not only what we read and how we think about things today, but also Western history more generally. Okay? So the work that we're looking at is not going to be inconsequential. Arguably, the Republic is the greatest work of Western literature of all time. It is sprawling. It is philosophical. It is literary. There are a lot of things that are going on in this work, and if you're not paying attention, they're going to slip by you. Okay? But it should be accessible. It should not be as perhaps confusing as Descartes' Meditations. Okay? So I hope you all really get into it. Now, this work takes a particular form. Okay? The Descartes work that we looked at was a series of meditations in which he's sitting alone and he's reflecting and thinking about these questions. I'm sure you've read novels or short stories in your time. The Republic is what we would call a dialogue. Okay? It's a dialogue between a bunch of different characters. And as we'll see, there's a lot symbolically going on in this book. Okay? The characters themselves are symbols. The movements of the dialogue are symbolic. Okay? This isn't just a work of philosophy. This is an incredible work of literature. So as you're reading it the next few weeks, keep that in mind. It's so dense. There is a lot that you can bite on and chew. Okay? So use those critical thinking skills and really interrogate each and every word if you can. I realize you don't have the time and probably the drive for that, but it will be worth your effort if you actually seriously, critically analyze this thing. Okay? Our main character in the dialogue is Socrates. Has anybody heard of Socrates? Who is Socrates? Wise guy? Yeah. What would we call him? Relevant to this class, perhaps.
Philosopher.
A philosopher, right? And what is a philosopher? Where do we get the word philosophy from? Well, allow me to remind you. It comes from two Greek words, philo and sophia, which means love of wisdom. The philosopher is someone who loves wisdom, who loves truth, who pursues truth and understanding of the world. Okay? And this is what Socrates is supposed to represent in this work. Okay? He was Plato's mentor and therefore had a huge impact on the development of Western history and Western philosophy. But he is also supposed to represent here like the archetypal wise man. Okay, or the archetypal philosopher. The person who cares about the truth, who prioritizes searching after the truth, figuring out what the hell is going on above all else. Okay? And one who lives his life according to that pursuit. In the other Platonic dialogues, Socrates plays a number of other roles. One of them is what we might call the gadfly. He describes himself as basically a horsefly who is biting the butt of Athens, this is the city-state in which they live, in order to awaken them from complacency in their own ignorance. Okay? Similarly, he's described himself in the other Platonic dialogues as a midwife. What does a midwife do? Yeah, helps deliver a child. If you think about this symbolically, philosophically, he helps people give birth to their ideas, to well-formed, reasonable, true ideas. Or he helps reveal for people that the ideas that they have are not well formed, that they are a wind egg, that they're not worth keeping, that they should be thrown away. Finally, he's also described in the Platonic dialogues as something like a stingray or an electric eel. Someone who paralyzes his interlocutors. And how does he do this? Well, he asks them questions. He engages in this practice called elenchus. You can think of elenchus as basically meaning refutation. Here is how Socrates would handle himself, and why ultimately he ended up getting into trouble. He would walk around the city of Athens seeking to have conversations with people, asking them basic questions about things. What is justice? Engaging people in conversation. Throughout the course of the conversation, of course, he would end up leading those he spoke with to realizing they really have no idea about what the thing is that they're talking about. They don't have knowledge of it. They don't have reasons and justifications for their view, proper ones. Which is why we might say he engages in this kind of practice. Through asking questions. Through, we might not want to say nitpicking their views, but analyzing them. It was on account of this work where he was asking people questions, trying to come to the truth of things, revealing their opinions and views to be false or contradictory or nonsensical, that Socrates ultimately ended up getting into trouble. Near the end of his life, he was accused of impiety, that is, blaspheming the gods, saying that the gods don't exist. And he was accused with corrupting the youth of Athens. How so? Well, getting them mixed up in their beliefs. His accusers argued that he was leading people astray. He was leading them away from a virtuous and just life. It is not unreasonable to think, however, that his accusers didn't like what Socrates was doing because Socrates was a threat to the system. Ultimately, what ended up happening to him was he was found guilty of these crimes, and he could either be exiled from Athens forever, or he could drink the hemlock and die. Suicide, you might say. Socrates ultimately chose the hemlock. If you want to know why, well, read Plato's Apology, where Socrates describes his reasoning about why it would be unjust to flee and be exiled. In that dialogue, we have the origins of social contract theory, we might say. So Socrates was killed. Plato's mentor was killed. And this had a deep influence on Plato. We're going to see this influence in the Republic, in how Plato describes the society of his day, in what he argues, how things should be changed, how we should understand our place and our role in society, and what the philosopher's role should be. Now, to get to the dialogue, there are a bunch of different characters. Okay? We have Socrates, we have Glaucon, Adiamentus, Polemarchus, Thrasymachus, Cephalus. A bunch of different people are going to be speaking in this dialogue. And as you read it, keep in mind that these characters are meant to be symbols. They're not just characters who are driving the conversation forward, they are symbols in and of themselves. Each character is going to represent a form of government, we might say, and in a parallel way, a certain character, a certain constitution. Socrates is going to be associated with, he's going to symbolize what Plato thinks is the highest form of government, aristocracy. He is virtuous. Even though he says he doesn't know things, Plato obviously is going to symbolize him as someone who has knowledge, who has this pure pursuit, desire to pursue the truth. Someone who does just things, who is wise. Then we have Glaucon. Glaucon, in the story, is a young man, up and coming. In an economic way, in a class way, he is an aristocrat. But with regards to his character, he's not quite there yet. In real life, he was actually the brother of Plato, I believe. But in this work, he's supposed to represent the second best form of government and the second best form of character that we can have. A timocracy. Rule by the spirited. Rule by those who are pursuing honor, who value glory and honor. Next we have Adiamentus. He is supposed to represent rule by oligarchs, or rule by the wealthy. How does Plato characterize oligarchies and oligarchic constitutions? Well, because they have money and they care about money, he represents them as greedy, as having a moral fault. You can think of an oligarchy as basically being ruled by the wealthy and the property owners. Okay? Polemarchus is supposed to represent the second worst form of government, Plato thinks, which is a democracy. Rule by the masses. Rule by the unintelligent masses who don't know what's going on and who are ruled by their desires, pulled in every which way. They are not properly ordered in body and mind. They let their desires, their passions get the best of them. And so there is a conflict, there is a war inside the person who has a democratic constitution. Just as in democratic society, we have all of these different individuals fighting amongst one another about how things should be, and they are not aligned, they are not properly ordered. Okay? So we would associate with this form of government, this constitution, kind of unrestrained desire. What do you think is the worst form of government according to Plato? Any guesses? What do you think is the worst form of government? Yeah. Corrupt, yeah, this last one is going to be corrupt. How about a dictatorship or a tyranny? That's who our character Thrasymachus is going to represent. Okay? A tyrannical constitution, the tyrannical form of government. Someone who, like the Democrat, is desirous and has this unrestrained desire, but it's taken up to another level, and they're not afraid to use violence and force to get what they want and impose their will on others and screw other people over because they want the power and they're going to do what they're going to do. Now, we're not going to read these chapters. They're called books in the Republic. But at one point, Socrates describes how government can devolve. And he describes how aristocracies can devolve into timocracies. They will devolve into oligarchies, which will devolve into democracies, which will devolve into tyrannies. So as you're going through the book, just keep this in mind. Okay, the characters themselves are symbolic. What happens in the dialogue is symbolic. There is a lot going on. Because this work is filled with literary devices. It's filled with myths. It's filled with philosophy, social political theory, ethics, philosophy of mind, you might say, philosophy of mathematics. This is a sprawling, dense, layered work. And I think it would be very wise for all of you to give it some critical attention, to really think about what's happening in the pages that we're going to read, what images are popping up, why Plato is arranging things in this way, etc. You should assume that everything has been intentionally chosen by Plato. Every word, every picture, every myth, every argument, everything. Okay? Do not assume that anything is accidental. Okay? As I've said, this work is dense, and it is a work that has been painstakingly crafted to deliver a certain message to us. Okay, any questions so far? Alrighty. Now, in order to understand this work better, you need to kind of have a picture of what's going on in Greece at this time. 2,400 years ago. Okay? Plato is writing during a tumultuous time in Greek history. This book was written after his mentor, Socrates, was killed. So that is going to play a role here in what Plato says and what he argues for. But also he's responding to the social, political, economic, and educational context. Okay? One way that we could interpret this work is that Plato is providing us with a critique of Athenian democracy. Prior to the time of writing this book, the city-state of Athens was involved in the Peloponnesian War with Sparta. Y'all know Sparta, right? Kick into the pit or whatever. The Athenians lost this war. Okay? And we get the sense that one of the reasons why Plato thinks Athens lost the war is because they were not properly ordered. They were not properly ruled. Somehow Athenian democracy led to this. So this book is written coming off of this violent, unstable time for Athens. Okay? Now, the Spartans won, and what do they do to the city-state of Athens? Well, they're going to rule over it. They conquered it. It's theirs now, right? So they instituted what's called the rule of the 30 tyrants. 30 people appointed by the Spartans who were going to rule over the Athenians, tell them what to do, craft the laws, direct soldiers and police. Plato himself traces his ancestry back to Solon, who is said to have developed many years ago the Athenian constitution. And being part of the aristocratic class, he's someone who has been around politics a lot, and he will enter politics himself, it is expected of him to do so, when he becomes the appropriate age. So he is immersed in the political world in some sense. He's watching all of this going on, knowing he has to enter this arena. So we can read the Republic as being a critique not only of this democratic form of government, which caused all this chaos and this conflict and led to this rule of the 30 tyrants because they lost the war, as well as a critique of the educational system and the social system. Plato thinks there is a lot wrong here. And if the Athenians want to get back on track, things have to change. Okay? Now, during the same time, this thing keeps falling off. There arose this group of people known as the Sophists. The Sophists didn't primarily live in Athens. They weren't citizens of Athens, but they would go around to these different Greek city-states, and they would go up to the aristocratic young men, and they'd be like, hey, I can teach you how to use words to get what you want. I can teach you how to be successful in politics when you have to speak in front of all these people. Come study under me. Give me some money and I'll teach you. I'll teach you how to use rhetoric. Plato, and arguably Socrates, saw this group as a corrupting influence on young men who are going to enter politics. Okay, why? Because they didn't teach philosophy. They taught rhetoric. How to use words to persuade people and get what you want. Rhetoric may have nothing to do with the truth. It may have nothing to do with the facts. It's all about just using those techniques that we talked about earlier in the semester to reach your goals. And the worst part is, they did it for money. They not only didn't provide knowledge to people, they just provided them ways to manipulate others, and they charged you for it. In contrast, of course, Plato is going to argue, do not shack up with sophistry. Don't follow these guys. What you should do is you should associate with philosophers. You should study philosophy and pursue philosophy. Why? Because it's all about truth. It's all about the pursuit of truth. Not ways of manipulating others. That's not right. That's not good. And so you can imagine Plato saying, one of the reasons why we're in this mess, this social, economic, political mess, we're being ruled by this other country, this other city-state, is partly because of these assholes. These are the ones who are actually corrupting the young men of the city, leading them astray, putting them on the wrong path. Finally, we can also imagine that part of what Plato is doing here is he's trying to change what people think is moral and immoral, what people think is just and unjust, the values that we ought to pursue and prioritize. Up until this time, many Greeks held Homer in very high esteem. The Iliad and the Odyssey. You've heard of these, right? These epic poems which are tales of violence and glory and war. Plato is going to say there's part of this that's good, maybe, and should inform our lives. But physical prowess, violent heroism, glory, that stuff isn't what ultimately matters. What ultimately matters is knowledge, truth, understanding, being just and virtuous. So part of what he is criticizing here is these ideals and the media of the time, what we might call art. Art and poetry. Plato also thought, like the Sophists, that the different art forms, particularly the poetry that people were developing during this day, because they were informed by these ideas, were corrupting people and leading them astray. So, as you read through this work, keep this stuff in mind. Keep Plato's motivations in mind. What is he criticizing, and why is he criticizing it? What is he trying to do with this book? Okay? He's trying to effect change. We might think of it as almost a complete overhaul of the system in some way. So, what Plato is doing here is he's trying to overturn not only the morality that they have, but also their understanding of religion and the gods, politics, education. And he's providing also a kind of apologetic for philosophy, a defense of philosophy. Because there are some, especially those in power, who think philosophy is bad and corrupting and we shouldn't engage in it. I mean, they killed his mentor, right? So not everybody has a rosy view of this thing. The book primarily is about these topics. Justice. How our soul, or you might say our mind, is organized. What fills it up? What we're paying attention to? The values that we have. It's about how we should organize ourselves socially and politically if we want to produce a virtuous and fulfilling society. And ultimately, it tries to answer the question of what the good life is. How should we live? What should we do? What should we value and pursue ultimately in life? Okay, any questions? All right, full steam ahead. I'll be uploading this onto Canvas, so if you don't get it all down, it's fine. Now, you've seen already some of the major symbols in the work about how these characters themselves are supposed to represent different forms of government and in a parallel way, characters or constitutions. There are a lot of other major themes and symbols that run through the work, and you should keep your eye out for them because they will help you understand what's going on and what Plato is trying to do. First, we have this theme of reality versus appearance. If the philosopher is pursuing truth, what do you think he or she cares about? What things look like or how things actually are? How things actually are, right? So we're going to see this theme pop up again and again. What we should be after is figuring out what the hell is actually going on, not just accepting what people tell us, not just accepting how things appear and being, oh, that must be the way it is. No, actually think about things, reflect on things. So we should engage in this project of philosophy, okay? We should analyze and reflect what other reflect on what other people say, what the government is telling us, what the institutions are telling us, our own beliefs. We should reflect on and interrogate those things too, so that we can come to a better knowledge of the truth. Okay? Because it is only by knowing the truth that we can actually intentionally live well, and that we can live well together. Of course, because Plato is praising philosophy here, in contrast to what a lot of people think is important during his day, like the sophists think, it's knowledge that we should be pursuing. Not political power or status. These aren't the things that ultimately matter. Okay? These things can be useful, but you're going off on the wrong track if you think this is what life is all about. Okay? So another theme that we're going to see during this work is what Plato kind of wrestling with, reflecting on how the philosophers, their relationship with other people right now is tenuous, especially those in power. Now, with regards to truth and understanding and a proper moral life, we're also going to see this theme, where Plato is going to be arguing implicitly and explicitly that if we want to get to, the truth of things, we have to use logic and reason. This is the basket we should put our eggs into. Okay? Not just letting our emotions control us, not just letting our desires rule us and doing whatever our body wants us to do, but prioritizing the mind and the health of the mind. Arguably, Plato is going to say that what it means to live well is that your mind, through reason, rules your body and your impulses and your urges, your desires, and your emotions. Finally, we're going to see a few other major themes. Instead of rhetoric, learning how to manipulate people and using those tactics just to get what we personally want, we should engage in this thing called dialectic. Now, what is dialectic? You could imagine it as it's a form of reflection and conversation. Not just conversation with other people, talking about the big questions of the world and what's real and what's true, but conversation with yourself. Reflecting on your own beliefs, interrogating them, right? Engaging in this process in which you analyze, and you think, and you reason. That is what we should pursue over these manipulative strategies that aren't going to ultimately be good for us or other people. Thus, we also see that the person who is good and just and living a virtuous life, they build themselves up and they build others up. Their constitution is properly organized and arranged with the reasoning mind at the top, ruling over the lower things like the passions. And Plato is going to argue through Socrates that in a lot of ways, the ideal character a person can have mirrors the ideal form of social and political organization. And that there's a causal relationship between the two. If you have a bunch of people in society who are not ordered and educated properly, that's going to lead to chaos in society and conflict and suffering. Whereas, if you have somebody who is properly ordered and virtuous and pursuing truth and engaging in dialectic, if you have a bunch of people like that in your society is going to flourish. So a lot of what Plato is going to be doing in this work is describing in some sense what kind of society we would need. Its laws, its norms, its rules, its values in order to produce good, just people. And so that there can be a smooth functioning here and a flourishing. Now I'm just going to give you a little summary of some of the major ideas across these different books, what we would call chapters. You're also going to read this in the synopsis, hopefully over spring break. I'm not giving you any homework over spring break, but you should get a head start on book 1. It'd be a good idea. So what does Plato talk about in these books? Well, obviously it's going to be about justice. So much of books 1 and 2 is about laying out these different ideas of what justice is and working through them, showing why most of them are wrong and why people don't really have a proper conception of what is just. We're going to see an explicit movement in the dialogue. Be on the lookout for it. One of the characters is going to leave the dialogue. This is supposed to represent for us that these Homeric ideals and values on which Greek society is based, physical prowess, violent heroism, these things gotta go. We can't base our society on values like these. In the second book, I believe, we get a wonderful thought experiment. Does anybody know what this is? What this is a picture of?
It's the One Ring from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Right. This is the One Ring, right? Sauron's ring. Plato basically came up with this idea. Okay? It's called the Ring of Gyges. The interlocutors, Glaucon and Adiamentus, aren't satisfied at the end of Book 1 with Socrates' arguments that they should pursue justice rather than an unjust life. So they discuss the possibility of, what if somebody had this ring that when they put it on, it made them invisible, and they could get away with anything that they wanted? Defend for us, Socrates, why we should walk the just life and do just things if we had a ring like this and we could get away with whatever we wanted, all the unjust things that we wanted, murdering, stealing, and we'd never be found out. This takes up a large portion of the book, in which Socrates tries to argue that justice not only brings good consequences for us, but it is valuable in and of itself, choosable for itself. Also, we're going to get throughout these books that the way people are is going to influence how society is. The laws, the institutions, the rules in society, the education is going to go the other way as well and going to influence how people develop, whether they're just or not, whether they're wise or not, etc. Now, the Republic offers a very long, extended argument on what justice is, how we should live, and what the ideal society looks like. What they're going to call in the work a city. Okay? Because they live in a city. They live in Athens, the city-state of Athens. One of the major themes is that the ideal society needs kind of an enforcement arm. Okay? In the work, these are going to be called guardians. They play the roles of soldiers fighting against invaders, protecting the city, and the police. And a lot of time is spent up describing how these people are going to be educated, what they need to be like in order for them to do their jobs well and justly, so that the society can flourish. We're also going to see Socrates arguing that there are 3 values or virtues that people need to develop in themselves and act according to if the city is going to flourish, if they're going to flourish individually. Moderation, courage, and wisdom. All of these are important. Because if the people don't embody these things, your society is going to go to shit, Socrates says. If we could be a little brash about it. Therefore, in order to have an individually flourishing life and a flourishing society, the people need to be able to achieve and exercise self-control over their desires and urges, and they should seek knowledge first, wisdom, truth, understanding, over and above this material stuff. Wealth is not what you should ultimately be aiming at. Pleasure is not what you should ultimately be aiming at. Political power and status, no. What matters is knowledge, because you can't live a good life unless you have that thing, okay? Unless you know what the hell is going on. So when we have problems in society, Socrates is going to imply that unless you first develop knowledge and self-control, your attempts at fixing things are going to actually make things worse. Thus, if we want a flourishing society, if we want good, happy, healthy people, if we want everything running smoothly, good education and media is key. Education is critical. At one point, Socrates, they asked him, well, how are we ever going to create this ideal society you're laying out for us? Can we do it here right now? And he basically says, no, you have to basically get rid of everybody 10 years of age or older. And you'd have to start over from the kids. So good education is key. Likewise, what people are allowed to consume and read and listen to is also key. We receive in the Republic an incredibly intense argument for mass censorship. Because the things that people read and listen to and consume corrupts them. So the rulers are going to have to only allow people to read and listen to certain things. And in the long discussion about what these guardians are going to look like, who eventually, if they have the aptitude for it, can become the philosopher kings who rule over everybody else, and how they're going to live, and how they're going to, do their thing, he imagines that this soldier police force is going to kind of live communistically. There's not going to be any private marriages. The guardians aren't going to know who their children are. They're all going to raise the children that they have together. The philosopher kings who are going to rule this ideal society will set up some sort of lottery system in which basically a eugenics program, so that the best guardians virtuously and in combat will have children with the other best guardians. None of them will know who their children are, and they won't refer to anything as mine. They will share everything. An interesting kind of image, right? Later, we get a more explicit description of what Plato is really trying to get at in this work and who's going to rule in this ideal society. We are going to read in this class the two images that he presents in books 6 and 7, the divided line and the cave. Plato presents these images in order to basically lay out his metaphysical theory. Plato thinks that this world that we live in, this physical world of the senses, is constantly in flux, and it's changing, and it's imperfect. What is more real and more perfect, and what we should pursue, are these things called the forms. The forms don't exist in this material reality that we live in. Rather, they exist in a different realm. They exist in the intelligible realm of the understanding. What are they? they're basically like concepts, okay? Plato thinks that what makes a thing, for example, what makes this crutch a crutch is that it participates in the form of crutchness. These forms exist in some other transcendent realm. They're universal, they're eternal and unchanging. That is what makes a thing ultimately what it is. The degree to which it participates in this idealized conception, which is real. He thinks it's real. It's not just all in our minds. We just can't have access to them in the physical world or through our senses. We get access to what these idealized forms or concepts are through the mind, through reasoning. The divided line is supposed to represent this kind of view. Okay? As we'll see, Plato, through Socrates, is going to argue that you can imagine our world as existing along some sort of vertical axis, okay? With the stuff that's more real, more perfect, eternal, and unchanging, the stuff of knowledge at the top, and less real, imperfect, changing stuff at the bottom. Things that are going to be at the bottom are like images and reflections of things. There is no having any knowledge of that stuff because it's not actually real. Like imperfect facsimiles or something. So, with regards to the things in the world, we should take different kinds of views and attitudes towards them. We should recognize that things like images and reflections are imperfect, changing, won't get us to knowledge and truth. What we should pursue, if we really want to know what's going on, are the forms of things. Okay? He uses the cave example in order to describe, well, what it means to live as a person with a mind in a society that is imperfect, in this material world of things that are changing and in flux, and what philosophy can do for us. In the cave, he imagines that there are people living in this deep, dark place who are trapped and chained down there. They've never seen the light of day. There's another group in the cave that casts shadows on the walls that the people look at, and the people think the shadows are what's ultimately real, but it's all just a play. It's all just fake. Plato argues, this is our lives. We are in the cave. We are being shown shadows on the wall. From conditioning, our upbringing, government, our institutions, etc. So what we need to do is we need to use philosophy to get out of the cave so we can actually set our eyes on what's really real and what really matters and break out of our ignorance. Now, as for this idealized society that, Socrates is drawing for us, it's going to be what we call an epistemic aristocracy. Aristocracy, rule by the few. There's going to be a few people in power determining the laws, ruling over everybody else. Epistemic, why will there be a few people ruling us? Well, it will be the few who have knowledge, who actually understand how things work, who actually know what's going on, those who have escaped the cave. Plato imagines, through Socrates, that in the ideal society there will be a small number of philosopher kings who will organize how things go, determine education, determine what gets censored, set up the rules and the laws, etc. And these are the ideal people we could choose for rulers, the philosophers, the knowledgeable people, because they don't want power in the first place. In fact, Socrates ends up arguing, in our ideal society, well, we'd have to force the philosophers to rule, because they really don't want to do it. Because all they want to do is philosophy. But who would best rule over people? Well, people who know what the hell is going on, who are pursuing truth and wisdom all the time. He imagines this three-tiered class society. We have the philosopher kings at the top. They set the rules. They're determining what's going on, how the society lives and functions. We have our soldier police in the middle. The auxiliaries who enforce the law, who defend the city from invaders, break up fights and stuff. And then we have the producers on the bottom. The merchants, the craftsmen, the laborers, the farmers, the people who make the stuff that the society needs. Plato also envisions that neither the philosopher kings or our soldier police will be able to handle money, really. They'll be given a wage, a meager wage to live on, but the producers end up coming away with 95% of all the wealth that they produce. He goes so far as to argue that if we set up a three-tiered class society like this, where each group knows its proper role and commits to it and does what they're supposed to do, things are going to be great and flourishing. And we may need to tell them a noble lie about why they're stuck in this class. Well, it's because they have a certain soul that is either gold or silver or bronze. And that's just the way the world works. But even though we have to lie, this is going to lead to flourishing. But it's going to be the philosopher kings who basically decide everything, who rule with knowledge and wisdom. They control the education, but there's going to be censorship of a lot of things Plato thinks is corrupting on people. Like a lot of the poetry of his day, like a lot of the art of his day. Now, Plato isn't exactly a feminist, but he's better than a lot of his contemporaries, I would say, because he even says, like, look, these philosopher kings, they can be men or women. It doesn't matter. Women are capable of ruling too and being knowledgeable and wise and reasonable. So there's a certain equality that's built into the system as well. Both men and women have opportunities to, rule if they have the reasoning skills and the merit and the drive. And finally, we end the Republic with a myth. The myth of And I think what this myth is supposed to represent for us is the importance and necessity of justice. In this myth, Plato describes how people live their lives here on earth, and their lives ending up being good or bad to the degree that they follow justice or injustice, what's good and right versus what's bad and self-serving and unhealthy. And in the myth of he argues, we're actually all caught up in this cycle of reincarnation. Our souls are immortal, and whether or not we live a just and knowledgeable life is going to inform when, after our body dies, when we go up and we ascend, the kind of life that we choose for ourselves next. Of course, we won't remember any of this because before we, choose our life and then go back down to earth again and live in a mortal body, we drink from the waters that cause us to forget what happened before. But in this way, Plato weaves justice with this cosmic image, this cosmic message about how important it is for us to align ourselves with this objective standard of what's right and what builds others up and what makes ourselves and others healthy. It's risen to cosmic importance. Okay. That's all I have for the introduction. For the last 10 minutes, let's look at Book 1. We're going to read it together. Let's see if I can get this right. Okay, could I get someone to read the narration?
I went down to the Curious yesterday with Glaucon, the son of Ariston, to say a prayer to the goddess, and also because I wanted to see how they would manage the festival, since they were holding it for the first time. I thought the procession of the local residents was beautiful, but the show put on by the Thracians was no less in my view. After we had said our prayer and watched the procession, we started back towards town. The
Polemarchus.
The Polemarchus, the son of Glaucon, saw us from a distance, and as we were hurrying homeward, and told his slave boy to ask us to wait for him.
Okay, stop right there. You would not believe how much is packed into this opening paragraph. What do you get from this? What does this tell you about Plato's message, about the society in which they live? What's popping up for you? Start with the first line. I went down to the Piraeus yesterday. What do you associate with being higher as opposed to lower? Maybe knowledge? Maybe goodness? These things are higher than ignorance or badness? Right? Already from the very get-go. Okay? There's a vertical axis. Socrates goes down to the Piraeus. Remember, he's the archetypal wise man or the philosopher. So, metaphorically, we could say he's spending his time in the heavens, thinking about things, right? Musing on things, coming to knowledge. So we have already here a symbol of up as being associated with philosophy. We might say goodness, knowledge. And what does down represent? Well, the opposite of those things. If you sink into your base urges, right, or into your pleasures, you sink into depravity, you sink into ignorance. Call it vice. The Piraeus. I'll give you some context. The Piraeus is the bustling, diverse seaport. So if I tell you that, what does that make you think of? A bustling place where a lot of transactions are happening, there's a lot of different people, a lot of different trade. What kind of place would that be like? Do you think the people there generally are going to be the best of the best? Probably not, right? We have a mix of a bunch of different kinds of ideas and ways of life and constitutions, okay? It's culturally diverse. In some sense, what happens in the Piraeus is democratic. So you have all these people doing their own things, pulling the group in different directions. Okay? Okay, so what else do we see? He goes down to the Piraeus with Glaucon to say a prayer to the goddess. What does that tell you about the society that they live in? Yeah.
Religion is usually a place where, the people lower on the totem pole have it. Like, she's going down to there to give a prayer to us. Is that, if there's not places to pray to the goddess where he's from?
There must not be places to pray to the goddess where he's at. Like, there are these, places that are communal that people would go to for sacrifices and prayer. Yeah, you might say, like, religion touches even those that aren't wise, aren't virtuous. But they live in a religious society, a religious community. Okay? And what kind of religious community? A polytheistic one. Okay? This is Greek polytheism on display. A lot of different gods and goddesses with different roles in society. Different things you're supposed to do to appease them, blah, blah, blah. He says, I wanted to see how they would manage this festival since they were holding it for the first time. And he says, I thought the procession of the local residents, the parade, was beautiful. This might signal for you that Socrates is capable of seeing beauty even in the strange and unfamiliar things. Remember, he's never seen this before. They're holding it for the first time. Okay? And so the setup we get is he's going to do his prayer. They're watching the procession of the festival. But when they started back to go back up where they came from, this Polemarchus guy sees them from a distance, sends his slave boy to stop them. And what does he say? He grabs Socrates' cloak to stop him. Polemarchus wants you to wait. Okay. Socrates turns around and asks, oh, where is he? He's coming up behind you. Please wait for him. All right. We will. Do you notice what's happening here? Who responds to the slave boy's request? Glaucon. What significance does that have? What do you think? Think about what happened to Plato's mentor in actual real history. Think about the role of the philosopher in the society at the time. Glaucon speaks for Socrates. I'll put it to you with a question. Are the philosophers the ones in charge of the society, making the laws, ruling over the people? I see shaking of head. No? No? You might view this partly as a symbol that, like, look, in this disorganized society, that isn't ideal, it's imperfect, it's the society that killed my mentor. The philosophers aren't the ones that are ruling and speaking for people and watching over them. It's lesser men. lesser men are deciding what's going on, making things crappy. Okay? This is the symbol here. Inferior men have control in society. Okay? Because remember, Glaucon is not going to represent the best constitution and the best form of government. He's a step down.
But isn't Glaucon like honor? Like, wouldn't he want to honor the higher up, or is it more just like a pride thing? Self-righteousness? What's the difference?
Just think of it as a literary device. Yeah, Glaucon thinks honor is important and he's pursuing honor. So he's not too far from the ideal, but he's not there yet. Shortly after that, Polemarchus caught up with us. Adiamentus, Glaucon's brother, was with him, and so were Niceratus, the son of Nicias, and some others, all of whom were apparently on their way from the procession. It looks to me, Socrates, as if you two are hurrying to get away to town, Polemarchus says. What kind of constitution and form of government does Polemarchus represent? Look back at your notes.
Democracy.
Democracy, right? So when you think democracy in the context of this book, think warring desires and urges going on inside you, pulling you in all these different directions, okay? There's not a unity. A bunch of different parts going different ways. He speaks up. Socrates says that isn't a bad guess. But do you see how many we are? How many's in my posse? Certainly. Well then, either you must prove yourself stronger than all these people, or you will have to stay here. What could be going on here? What does this symbolize?
It symbolizes the democracy sentencing him to death.
Yeah, it could be. If we think about it a little more generally, think about the difference between force and persuasion. The philosopher, right, would persuade people to come to their views, persuade people of the truth. What do lesser, inferior people do? They resort to violence, to force, to compelling people to do things. And Polemarchus just says that outright, right? Well, prove yourself stronger, or we're going to force you to stay here and come with us. You're not going to get your way, right? Unfortunately, and this is the last thing I'll say, again, wise men, the philosophers, don't have control in this society. Okay, there's conflict and there's violence. Force in Athens is winning out over truth and reason and persuasion. This basic theme of power versus knowledge is going to run through the entire work. So, over spring break, it would be wise if you read book 1, because this is what we're going to be doing for the next 3 weeks, is we're going to be talking about this stuff and working through it together. And if there isn't enough participation, I'm just going to send you all out of class and home. So if you actually want to learn and see the wisdom and the incredible value this book could have to your life, come prepared. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. I hope you all have a wonderful break.